Team, we're traveling long and far on this one today with the Selling Well podcast because we're chatting with Jason Cooper, the sales relationship coach from Dublin, Ireland. And I really love these conversations when I'm speaking with other practitioners, sales training practitioners in the industry, because we really get into the heart of, how do you effectively run a sales workshop and actually impact behavior that drives the result for the organization. Jason trains both individuals and teams. And today we're talking about a couple things. We talk about the use of humor to humanize the whole selling process. We talk about building trust and resilience. We talk about a little bit about neuroscience as it pertains to buyers and sellers. And Jason does a little bit of research and work in that category. By the way, those of you following us closely know I recently guested on Jason's podcast, the Global Sales Leader podcast, which was super fun. And today we were really looking forward to actually continuing the conversation today on the Selling Well podcast. As always, when I'm speaking with other practitioners, there's always something for me to learn. I hope today there's lots for you to learn and take away from this podcast. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, because as you know, that really matters to us. And by the way, that's how we get great guests like Jason Cooper. So here he is, folks. Enjoy today's podcast. Jason Cooper, the sales relationship coach. Hey, Jason, welcome to the show. It's so happy to finish our home and home stand here. I was so happy to guest on your podcast. It's great to have you on mine.
Appreciate that. I'm so looking forward to it. And thank you so much.
Well, the pleasure. How's Dublin today?
Dublin is very diverse, meaning this morning it was like a hurricane. This afternoon, it's beautiful sunshine. But we get four seasons in a day. So I'm expecting a bit of hailstone and a bit of snow a bit later.
Well, that keeps it interesting, doesn't it? You can never get used to it.
You have to prepare for everything. It's an everyday occurrence. I went out earlier and I didn't have a waterproof on me and I got absolutely soaked. And it was sunny. It was literally sunny. And funny enough, exactly the same happened yesterday. I was going out to deliver a workshop. And it was beautiful sunshine, went on to the motorway, or you might want to call it the freeway. And all of a sudden, I got very scared very quickly because the wind was going sideways and the rain was going sideways. So planning for everything is essential.
Well, you never put any of your coats away.
Absolutely. Which probably pivots us to what we're going to be speaking about today.
I think it does nicely, but maybe as a starting point, Jason, why don't you give us the short story of your professional journey? We do the same thing, you and I, and we're going to have a great conversation about sales training and coaching and some of the things happening in B2B sales today. I'm really excited to speak with you. Give our listeners the short story on how you got here.
Very short story. I'm an Englishman and I live in Ireland. And I moved over here about 20 years ago and was transferred from one company to another. And my wife's Irish. So hence why I live in Dublin, Ireland now. So I co-founded a couple of startups along the way with investment from a good EMEA company over here. And we co-founded that. And about 10 years ago, I went on my own journey to learn about me, but also to pivot what I can give back to the world. So now what I do is I teach others, number one, to believe in themselves, but also to be empathetic to the client and to build up significant people skills. And it is all about people skills. Everything that we do in sales, regardless of what methodology that we have, I think they're all pretty much the same, to be honest with you. But
Jason, ours is much better, but we'll get to
that.
Yeah,
of course.
We'll get to that in a minute, of course. But yeah, you're right. They're very similar.
Yeah, they're very similar from slightly different approaches, whether you're enterprise or whether you're speaking with smaller clients, but significantly the same. But obviously the conversations can be a little bit richer the bigger the organization that you speak to. So I work with large and medium-sized businesses. So I love the behavioral side of things. I love the psychology side of things. And I love to understand how people work and how people operate. using an eclectic array of different skill sets.
Well, by the way, I absolutely love the approach. And I think you can't debate making connections with people and helping other people and focusing on empathy and authentic, curiosity. These are all these critical components, to building trust, building credibility. And I know you've had really deep experience and been in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of folks training them today. And one of the tougher questions, maybe for both of us to kick around, it doesn't feel like, human beings have changed that much in the last 100 years. And if we go back all the way to like Dale Carnegie and How to Win
Mhm.
Friends and Influence People, and it's always at the top of the nonfiction, bestseller list from New York Times. Even back then in the 30s and 40s, the message was you can make more friends in 2 months by taking an interest in somebody else than you can in 2 years by trying to get them interested in you.
Absolutely.
With what you see, Jason, why is this a message that we have to keep communicating to the professional sales community? Like, is there a reason we're not getting this message?
I think every generation has to start from scratch again,
Nice.
and we're reinstalling. So they might have left college, university. That's where they starting point. But now it's time to really start to flip the script a little bit to make them learn differently. And I went through it, and I'm sure you did as well. Like,
Hmm.
business communication skills is just so important. And also having that communication skill, because it's not about you now.
Yeah.
And especially when you're in a business orientation, it's all about the customer, and it's all about their needs, and it's all about their wants and desires. And if you can do that, that's the magic, where that magic actually happens, is if you can help them think and deep dive into their minds and do whatever you need to do to help them feel at ease and resonate with what you have to say. I think that's where the magic happens, I believe. Because it is, and again, I keep repeating, and you know as well as I do, it is how to teach people's communication skills, but people skills, just on that basic level. How do you need to build up better rapport with people and trust and connection? Like, we connected straight away. I know we're on the same level,
Hmm.
but it's all about that. And it's getting an interest in what you do.
It is. Well, part of the joy of, us doing this podcast, and I'm pretty sure you doing the Global Sales Leader podcast, which
Mhm.
is enormously popular. I think part of the joy is I'm just interested to find out about you today. And the reason I think it resonates or some people listen to the podcast is because, my authentic curiosity to continue to learn. I know I'm going to learn something in the next half an hour chatting with you. And I
Well, let's
want
hope so.
to. Yeah, I want to. Certainly just learned something about Dublin, but I want to. And I think that authentic curiosity in this space is what's required from everyone out there. And one of the things that I think it's the challenge is for a lot of sales leaders today is, how do you trigger that authentic curiosity? And, how do we evolve salespeople, particularly junior ones, from,
Mm,
engaging with a buyer where they're certainly experiencing some anxiety. They'll default to scripts. It's pretty easy to end up pitching at somebody instead of giving them the confidence that they've earned the right to have a great conversation with someone and ask
mm.
reasonable questions and stay engaged in the conversation instead of mentally going over to the filing cabinet to go, man, what am I going to say next?
That is the challenge that a lot of people have. And even when I've been coaching people, and even last week I was coaching someone, just get stuck in conversation and they talk aimlessly about nothing. And
Yes.
they even, I heard the other week, and it was saying, "Oh, I can hear that you're busy in the background." How do you know? You
Hmm.
don't know that I'm really busy. Or how do you know that people aren't, I'm not going to take too much of your time? Well, you are
Yeah.
taking too much of your time. So, you know, get out of the way of making excuses why you actually give them the call. And that's where the anxiety is actually coming, because you tend to waffle when you're nervous, but then you tend to waffle when you don't have a plan or an idea of where you need to be going in the
Yeah.
conversation. And to build that immediate trust, look, you're calling them, don't apologize. Oh, I'm sorry to call you. No,
I
you're not
know.
sorry.
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Why
I'm
do
actually
it?
happy I caught you.
Yeah.
So I'm so delighted I caught you. And by the way, I've got some value and insight to provide. I can't wait to have a quick conversation with you here. I think a lot of those things, without being too self-serving, a lot of these things do come down to training or coaching.
Does.
And of course, anybody new in role, this is a difficult thing. You're jumping outside a comfort zone. And so you've got to figure out this way of how do you get to this point where you can feel calm but confident on an actual demand generation call or a first conversation with a
Mhm.
client or prospect, because there's going to be some triggers in that conversation where they consciously sense your confidence, your intent, your likability, your credibility. But there's probably 30 times that unconscious triggers where they have this way of sensing whether this is going to be value or what your intent is.
Mhm.
And when you find the our experience anyway, and I'm certainly interested in your opinion, Jason, is, one of the challenges we see out there is a lot of organizations, CEOs can sell for their company, the VP of sales can sell, but they can't really train anybody else to do it.
Mm.
And when you start to break down exactly what happens in that engagement with a client or prospect, you get CEOs, they're not pitching anything. They're sitting down, having this authentic conversation, learning about business, have a conversation about the individual's needs, wants, and desires in the future. And that whole conversation translates into the buyer dropping their guard, dropping the wall, and
Mm.
actually, feeding back information that's helpful to enable that CEO to determine, is there any way we can help you or not?
Yeah. It's all about nowadays, it's deep selling, which is doing your due diligence in advance. Like whether it takes you a couple of minutes or 20, depending on the size of the
Yeah.
organization, find out a little bit about them. Find out, go onto LinkedIn and find out who they're connected to as an example. Go on to LinkedIn and find out what the company's posting about and what they're
Yes.
posting about. But also have a look on all the social feeds, go onto their website. Now use an AI tool called Perplexity, and
Mm,
I type that in and I go in and I find out everything that I can about that person. Even myself, I can go on and go, well, how does Jason represent himself in the world? What type of buyer is Jason? What type of salesperson is Jason? And you can
yeah.
go with that quadrant there, red, blue, pink, or orange, or whatever. And you can decide on that. So now you can use these tools that what I do. And 5 minutes before a call or half an hour before a call, you list down everything that you need to know about that client.
Yeah.
So you can build that instant rapport because people like themselves. So if you can find something to build up instant rapport, there's something going on in the frontal lobe of our brain called the mirror neurons. And if you can connect with someone on their level and find out there's a synergy within that person or that person, oh, you like rugby. I like rugby. That's
Mhm.
on the basis level. Oh, I understand that your company is doing such and such at the moment. How is that affecting you? Or whatever. But do your due diligence. Bit of a cliche. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right. You would love it. And I really, let's double click on, that it could take 5 minutes, it could take 20 minutes, but this is not something that takes an hour and a half.
Yeah.
With all of the tools available today, no one should ever have a first meeting with anyone under any circumstances without doing that research. I mean, even today, we're doing podcasts. You and I do this.
Yep.
A lot of these, we're going to do them back to back. But I know what your career history is. I have your LinkedIn profile up.
Yep.
I've already thought about the 10 questions for today's podcast. Who knows if we're going to get to them? But that way I can jump into a conversation like this and be in the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the other things that, you know, having that plan or structure for the conversation, I think consciously we go, okay, I got a plan and I know what's
Yep.
going to happen if this call goes well. If not, I'm going to feel good. But I think subconsciously as well, something comes across, Jason, because I feel like I've earned the right for a conversation and that comes across. If I've done the research and I have a couple of points of interest, I feel better
Yep.
about that conversation they're going to feel better, the recipient, because of Cialdini's, persuasion. So
Yep,
great book
there's
by Robert
6 or
Cialdini.
7, depending on what book you
That's
read.
right. Yeah, the elements that actually influence behavior. One of them's the theory of reciprocity.
Yep,
Whereas human beings, if you do something for me, I'm almost compelled to do something good for you. So
absolutely.
it's, it doesn't mean I'm going to buy from you, but I might grant you a few minutes for a conversation. If you differentiate on that, call that you've actually found out who I am, what we do, and all of those kind of good things,
Mhm.
it's in your DNA.
And you're right, what you just said there just before, I just want to just get back into the planning part.
Yeah,
And what you've already suggested is having those 10 questions in advance of what you might say. You might not ever get to them, but at
right.
least you planned them in advance, which is specific to them, not some generic random question that you picked out on ChatGPT or whatever, although
Yeah.
they might help. But as long as you have 10 questions that you can go, well, these are there in advance. I have loads of questions around me up there that I might always use if I'm in a conversation, which really helps me know where I need to go in order for me to get to maybe level 2 on that touch point.
Ah, well, first of all, thank you for that. I know where I'm trying to go. I
Yeah.
know where I want to go. Jason, we did a recent exercise with someone we were coaching. We called it the truth serum exercise. And we did role plays with the group where we said, let's assume my wife slipped some truth serum into my breakfast this morning. I'm a buyer, and any question you ask me, I'm going to give you a truthful answer. But think about the 5 questions you're going to ask as part of this call. So I'm
Mhm.
not going to be difficult. I'm going to give you full and complete answers. And what you find is people have no plan. So even if I gave them the full and complete answers to the questions they asked and told the full truth, it still doesn't lead them anywhere to close for a next step or to earn the right to proceed with the next meeting
Yeah.
or to move forward into a discovery. And this is where I think that your planning has to come into place. Really think about workshopping those amazing questions.
Yeah. I think so. And I think it's just to practice it. That rehearsal, and there's a lot going on in our brain all the time, but if you mentally rehearse, whether you speak it out or speak it to yourself, whether you keep your eyes open or closed. Sometimes I will mentally rehearse and I would
Ah,
visualize in my head and I would see that. And I would also, because I'm a visual thinker and that's
okay.
how I am, but other people are analytical. So they have to talk it out. I don't. I just go in and I can create pictures in my head and I can create the conversation. And ideally, what I'd like to be creating the conversation is a positive conversation that goes well.
Hmm.
Hopefully, majority of the time it will, because I've already presupposed in my head that I've imagined it to go well. And because our brains are so super powerful, we think and we create images in our heads all the time. So, how can we create that image that the conversation will go well? We've done our planning, we feel confident about that, and we're standing and our conviction and our body language is in the right way that is congruent to what's going to be coming out of our mouth. Because if things are not aligned with our body language, guess what? It's not going to happen out of our mouths. And it goes back with the age old saying is when you stand up and if you walk around and you're making sales calls, you smile into the phone. They don't know whether you're smiling or not, but it's just
Yes.
so very, very true.
Yes. It's so very, very true. And I know you do work, you stay current with a lot of neuroscience, which I want to
Yeah.
touch on
Love
there.
that.
But these are such fundamentals. And both of us, as it turns out, you've done 130 podcasts. I've done 100 and change. You learn very quickly it's better to do these podcasts standing up. Both of us
Yeah.
are standing up, moving around just a little bit. We're careful not to touch the mics. But we're certainly standing up, and you've had a perma smile on for this entire discussion. That energy and enthusiasm becomes contagious. I
Yeah.
start to
Oh,
smile because
absolutely.
you're smiling. So I loved when I was doing the research for today, finding out that part of what you do on the sales training and coaching front, you're into the neuroscience. I
Yeah.
love this, the neuroscience, the behavioral science. Tell us a little bit about some of the work you do there, some of the top trends that might be helpful for either sales leaders listening today or salespeople, just things for them to think about.
Okay, so one of the couple of the things that for people to consider is everyone has a process, but it's all in their heads. So something that I love to do with, I workshop a strategy and a methodology with them. And something I love to do is we mind map everything. And
Ah,
how I start and how to get people in the right context is, what are the natural steps for you to make yourself a cup of coffee? What do you do specifically? And what's your strategy behind that? This is how I would workshop it. But it's not me walking over there and making myself a cup of coffee. What happens? How many steps do I need to take?
mhm,
Specifically, are they large steps? Are they small steps? How far is it away from the counter? What do I have to
mhm,
do that next? I have to put my arm up. Well, how far do I have to put my arm up? And how far is it into the cupboard before I can reach into a mug? And then how far, and so on and so forth. It might sound very annoying, but there's a reason behind that. It's a strategy. It's to make people think in strategic direction. Then we whiteboard it out and then we mind map it out. So, what's your strategy? What's your methodology from every single point? And then let's merge everything together and pull out a main methodology that everyone is using because everyone has an idea about something. And then just crunch it down into 9, 8, or whatever points that might be. So we get a clear path of a complete overall strategy. So I like to
mhm,
pull things out and really start again and then push it back in with a really overall clear, precise process that everyone can use because larger and small companies do it. They go off in all the different directions. The larger the organization, the more sporadic it actually can be because you get the likes of the very big companies. There's so many people in the organization. They'll be up to 200,000 or whatever, and all doing different things.
yeah. Well, it becomes a real issue. I think it leads into I've had this debate and discussion with a lot of guests where they say, "Well, we don't like a sales process. We don't want to hold somebody so strictly to a sales process." And I take your approach, which is I actually do want to map out the steps to complete a sale for the business and be quite
Yeah.
specific about them. Now, that's quite different from sales strategy, which is our game plan to progress along those
Yeah.
steps successfully. And none of that prohibits somebody bringing their own sort of unique skill set and abilities to the table to do it their way.
Yeah.
But if they understand process and strategy, then they have this game plan you spoke of at the beginning. And so I like that idea of thinking, and your example of even leveraging making a cup of coffee is so good because what you probably find, I certainly find, and the people listening to this, we have a lot of folks who are mature salespeople, potentially in traditional industries, who are extraordinarily good
Yeah.
at client first, empathetic, solution based value selling, if you will. But when you say, "Hey, what's your sales process?" that confuses them because they don't think of things as a process.
Yeah.
But when you actually audit what they do, they're extremely meticulous and they actually do repeat the same things over and they're habit driven and they've been successful. So sometimes grabbing that, once you map it out as a process, then you can look at ways of improving at 5% or 7%.
Absolutely.
Not we don't have to convert, change somebody's behavior 40% to get an uplift. You get a flywheel effect of getting 3, 4, 5% better every month. That starts to become unbelievable in terms of the impact.
It's having people, everyone in from different points of view in the business as well. So get the marketing person because marketing and sales should be aligned. They've
Absolutely.
got to be aligned. But also get in production or whatever the words on their businesses, but also get them into the mix. So someone works with sales, someone works with marketing. It's a sales marketing a person. They design and map out how they perceive it. Then the high performers work with the low performers, and they understand that process and just dissect it. So overall, you're getting a really good eclectic viewpoint. That's what I love. That really makes me excited to see because that's when the magic happens, and that's when people actually understand how to improve and how to go, well, this is the overall methodology. What can we improve on here?
Yeah. How do you, when you're working, because you do one-on-one coaching as well,
Yep.
tell me a little bit about that process. You know, how you operate today. If I were a sales leader saying, listen, I need a little help or support, what's your kind of approach or methodology for helping somebody like me?
Oh, that's going to be a tough one. Helping you.
Yeah, sorry, let's have an easier one. Let's just pull somebody off the street,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
you'll
you
have an
can.
easier time than working with me.
Well, first of all, I would always have a 20-minute conversation with them. Nowadays, I can use AI note taker just to dissect exactly what they want and their challenges. And again, it's no difference. It's their challenges, where they see where they're falling down on their process and what's going on inside of their heads. Then I can pull out and think about a 5-step strategy for them. Mindset first. I
Mm,
always send a pre-coaching form for them to fill out. So they get themselves thinking on 5 different points. And they send that to me before. And then we just choose to find out what's stopping them from moving forward in certain aspects. So coaching is the way I look at it. You use elements of the Pareto principle. It's you do 20% questioning, they do talking 80% of the time. But
yeah,
we flip it on its head and you do the listening. And then you ask them another question. Then you ask them another question until you can find the juicy parts to make them think. And all you're doing is you're chipping away at it. But then another call could be more, well, let's have a look at what you're doing. Let's have a look at your process. And let's have a look about how and what you do in a call, and let's have role play that out. And then let's dissect the call afterwards and let's find out what's missing and what you're saying and what you're not saying.
yeah,
So there's lots of different things that we can go to, but always you have to pivot. And I think that comes with experience, Mark, is to work with them and to change if they go on into another direction. We just have to go, well, why are you doing that? But also, it's to really understand what's going on in their world. I can see in their body language if they're under pressure and they're frowning a lot. So, or they're stroking their chin, or they're stroking their neck, or whatever. They're under pressure, and then you go, well, what's going on there? There's something
hmm,
not happening, or there's something not happening because you. I've noticed something going on there, or their tone, their language just starts to get a little bit shaky because they feel like they're under pressure. So what's going on in their heads so we can change the narrative on how they're speaking to themselves, because we all speak to ourselves all the time. So what do we need to do to change that
yeah,
narrative in our heads to make it a little bit more constructive and impact them in a slightly different way? So changing that aspects of them and make them think more positively, because our brain will go on to that reptilian side of it and it go into the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And that's when we waffle. And that's what we suggested earlier. Some of the nervous salespeople will just waffle on parts because they're under stress, because they're out of their comfort zone and are not used to asking good questions and getting into that place where they need to be building trust, building rapport, but going on to that next step.
I love this idea of the internal voice and the critique, and I think it's such a powerful discussion point for today, Jason. By the way, over in Dublin in the UK, do you have something called Second City? Have you ever heard of Second City?
No, what is that? I was curious about that. What do you mean?
Yeah, Second City is, have you ever heard of the television show Saturday Night Live?
Yes, I
Okay.
have. Yeah.
So Second City is the North American leader in sort of improv. So they
Oh,
train
right.
comedians and they do sketches. And when you look at the cast of Saturday Night Live, super successful show, half of those people came from this world of Second City and improv. And it's
Ah,
it's such a huge idea, comedy and improvisation, that they have classes for the general public, and you can learn. And as it turns out, last night after, a long wait, my niece and I went to an improv class.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
boy, was it ever amazing. And, they're not getting you up and saying, "Hey, do some stand-up comedy." They're talking to you about some of the core concepts of improvisation. And
Mhm.
I was just thinking the whole time as I was going through this 90-minute class, I was thinking there was so much relevance to what we do, but that inner voice.
Yeah.
And the facilitator was such a gentle kind of coach, very, very good, room of 20 people. But he said, when you're doing improv, there's no time to feel bad about what you just did because it's going to be two people on a stage. One's going to give something. You're going to try a yes and continue on. And when whatever it is you say, he said, most of us are wired to review what we said and critique it
Yep.
because we're challenged by perfectionism. But he said the reality of improvisation is you have no time for that. So you are where you are. Whatever you said, you said. And the truth of it is, it was probably better than you think, but you've got to be in the moment to receive the next thing back from your partner. So it took us through a bunch of exercises where you're trying to control that inner voice. So when they say, "Hey, come up with a fruit," and you come up with strawberries, instead of thinking, "I should have used bananas," you go, "Strawberries, what a great answer." That sets your brain up to figure out the next one and the next one and the next
Yeah.
one. If you criticize yourself, it actually shuts you down.
Absolutely.
And I think this is so relevant to everybody listening here today. You're in a sales conversation, you're in the middle of a negotiation. That inner voice is criticizing what you do. You might even be doing a presentation.
Mhm.
Instead of just stepping back and going, wherever you are, that's it. That's where you are today. However you got there in that moment, and it's amazing. So
Yeah.
let's just build on it from there. He actually used a wonderful example where he was leading an evening at the Improv, packed house, and there were 4 or 5 teams that were gonna be going on display, and as he walked up to the stage, he fell flat on his face.
Oh.
And without even thinking about what he did, he just started crawling to the mic like he was a worm. He just didn't even think about it. He got up, continued on with the introductions, and as it turned out, every consecutive team that came out to the stage, they all crawled to the mic. And by the end of the night, this had become something. So his failure had actually become this kind of funny thing that everybody built on. And it just, the outcomes were much more positive than sitting in the moment, feeling terrible about yourself,
Yeah.
losing confidence, and then shutting your mind down.
And that's so very true because I think that's a really good skill to learn. So, as a salesperson, I think having that in a workshopy style, or if you want to have that intrinsic motivation to be slightly different and better than your other people in your sales team, improv is going to be a really good lesson for you. And it's going to
Mhm.
really help you think differently from every other salesperson who's doing the same old stuff, same old stuff. Let's think about how we can change our narrative only in our brain, but how can we think quickly and change things around? And as you say, because I've done that, there's a thing over here called Toastmasters.
Yes, yes. We have that over here
And
too.
yeah, exactly. And I think it actually came from Ireland originally. I'm not,
Oh, wow.
that's what the Irish tell me
The Irish
anyway.
are
So
saying that, which God bless.
yeah, has to be true in there somewhere. And, I remember going to it many years ago, over 10 years ago, when I was on my learning curve, and there was 2 groups together, and there's about 50, 60 people in the audience, and he said, "First person to come up and, I want you to talk in a minute about this banana." So I went, "I'll do it." So I just stood up and talked about banana, and that's
Great.
improv. So it's using your creative brain.
Yeah.
If you say you'll do it without thinking about it, you will tend to actually go ahead and achieve it because you've already said it and instructed it to your brain. And that's how, as delving deeper into some of the most successful people that I've ever encountered, they don't think about that stuff. All they think about is getting on with it and doing it
Mhm.
and using those language correctly in their heads to go, well, that didn't work. Let me try something different. Let me learn and let me pivot. Let me change the narrative and let me have that better conversation next time. And it's just so powerful. But also, as you were saying about improv, and as you're smiling as well, I think a bit of fairy dust here on humor because
Yes.
using the Cialdini, you probably say it differently to me, influence is likability. And the more we smile and the more we look, we're not going to be a stand up comedian making these calls. But if you're humorous or light-hearted with this, and I do this all the time now, and you probably notice my energy. I'm just like to give off a bit of humor, and it helps people being a little bit more relaxed. And the humor's on me, not no one else.
Well, yeah, self-deprecating humor. You talked about it in a recent post, which I really love, which is just lighten the discussion.
Yeah,
At one of the time, first of all, who wouldn't, when you start to think of how you want to spend all day, every day, I do want to be having fun. I want to do important things that help people and add to the community. And we love developing the potential of salespeople and sales leaders. And sometimes that's really hard work, and sometimes that's difficult work. But you want to have a good time while you're going through this process. And again, we're not putting somebody on the moon here. So,
yeah,
so we're not worried about a rocket launch with lives at stake. There are super important things in life. And the next sales call is not going to make or break your life. And in
yeah,
fact, the reality of it is to take it on. Nobody on a sales call is going to go into your pocket and take money out of it. The potential is only to add money into it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if I have a
exactly.
bad sales call, somebody's not going to go into my bank account and remove money. So there's only good things that are going to happen here. And I do think just, focusing on the pleasant, the positive, it puts everybody in a frame of mind where they're a
Hmm.
little more open. It's a very human thing.
It
We had a
is.
guy we had a guy named John Selig who on the show a couple of months back, and he talks a lot about comedy and sales. And I did share that in the most intense negotiation of my life, we were negotiating $1 billion transaction that we're trying to sell to a big bank.
Hmm.
And for deals of that size, they hire professional negotiators, which in some cases, with all due respect, these are not folks that we're going to want to go out and party with.
Yeah, yeah,
But we would leverage comedy, or a little bit of humor at the start of a very extended negotiation, 6 months of negotiation, a lot of it pretty tough, but just to lighten the mood, at the beginning of the day, because it made everybody a little more human,
yeah.
so we could have a human connection and then get to the work at hand.
I mean, I think that's just so good. And like again and again and again, it just puts people at ease. And I always incorporate it in everything that I do. Even I have to pick up the phone or
Right.
jump onto a
Of
Zoom
course.
call.
Sure we do.
And the first thing to do is make everything light-hearted before we get into it, which builds me into humor, but also in what we do. So again, if I'm using a recording thing, I know obviously you're going to be asking them, and that's sort of revolutionized what I'm doing now. Is I like to look at the data
Yeah.
behind things, and
Yes.
it can tell me what I'm doing well and what I can improve on. And I know I'm jumping around a bit today, but that's just how my brain works. I'm a visual thinker, so I think in things. So humor, but also it will tell me if I'm being too humorous or being okay, but also telling me how much I'm listening and who's doing most of the talking. So now it's there. It's there to tell me that things are going well or not so well, and what I need to review on, and how I
Yeah.
need to improve on. I'm a little bit OCD in data when I'm reviewing it because I want to make sure from past failings and not realizing it, but now I can actually see it and go, well, now I can make a difference and now I can make a change. And making that change in me can actually make a change in other people as well.
Yeah. Well, you're so methodical and precise about it, Jason. What are some of the sources of information for you in the outside world today? So, how do you stay current with these things like what's happening in sales or neuroscience or behavioral science? I see a lot of Harvard publications behind
Yep.
you there. We love those too. They're always referenced. But where do you go to stay current with what's going on?
Well, a couple of things is I have an eclectic array of insights, meaning as you suggested, the Harvard Business Review, is I don't necessarily just read sales books
Hmm.
because I think I'm being very narrow minded if I am,
Yeah.
because there's other things in and around that touch on those touch points that can lead into sales. So, business books, business communications. I got a business writing book behind me, and that's essential. And then I have something on getting into the flow state and
Ah,
also other things that might not necessarily be in sales. So I get my source of information from reading something which is slightly outside. Also, audio books. I read all of the sales books, but I also like to touch on other different subjects. Again, I learn from other people like yourself. I learn
thank you.
from you and everyone else I interact with. And I constantly scan and I take moments just to review and see what's going on around there. And whether it's a seminar, an exhibition, or something like that, I just have to learn, because the way I look at it now is if I can take one thing away and apply it to myself, and then I can teach it forward. So that's how I like to see it. And I'm just going to spin it back in as well, because I think a lot of salespeople don't really understand business, and they get this lovely basic salary. And I am jumping around, but it is all context behind it, because having a collected array of knowledge gives you an understanding of business and business process and ideas. But as a salesperson, you are a commodity as much as you might not. You cost the business money. So you get a lovely basic salary and then you get commission on top. But then you might get a phone. But then you have to cover overheads like marketing. Then you have to cover ads. You're nodding your head because you're business owner yourself and you know what it's like. But it's to really help the salespeople to really understand what that means and how they justify their existence. And because they get all these leads, lovely leads come through, but how much is a lead worth? But what do you need
Yeah.
to do to justify your existence? So I think the practicalities of you or us as salespeople to really understand our value, our worth, and how much we've been invested in, and how much the leaders can help us and inspire us and motivate us and all of that to give back to the business and for them to reinvest back into the business. But it is going back to the books and it is going back to how we learn and how we think. But I think some of the most successful salespeople out there really understand the value of a business and their business. And hopefully, at some stage, and if they're extremely successful, then maybe they start their own business or do something else. But these are the sort of things that I want to do, is to help people think and change. And it is about change. And I'm not going to use the word growth as much as I just used it, but it's to change their narrative and change their thinking and be successful. So that's everything that I do.
Well, boy, that's a nice wrap up for today. And Jason, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure meeting you. How do people listening to this podcast learn more about Jason Cooper or engage you?
I'll always be happy to that. LinkedIn is the number one. It's that's my personal brand. So love you to connect with me on that. I also have a website called jasoncooper.io. I don't use Twitter anymore. I've gone off that. Instagram is Jason A. Cooper. And you can get me on the various other social media platforms. But really, LinkedIn is the number one source. That's where I'm on a lot of the time. And that's how I give value to the world. But also love to get some really good connections and get the conversation going.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Jason, great to meet you. Thanks for joining today. Team, thank you as always for joining us for the Selling Well podcast. The intent of this podcast is to help improve the performance and the productivity of B2B sales. And in doing so, what we believe is going to happen is we're going to improve the lives of professional salespeople. That's why we do it. Now, we know we can always improve with these podcasts, and you help us do that. So please keep your constructive criticism coming our way. We love hearing that feedback. I respond to each and every note that we get, by the way. Keep sending them to Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email, and I respond to every bit of constructive criticism we get. And by the way, we love the direct feedback. Don't worry about dancing around things. We've made lots of changes to the show based on great suggestions we've received from people. If you like today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast and tell your friends. That's actually how we get great guests like Jason Cooper, because they want to know we've got an audience. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Selling Well podcast.